You're watching Reality Check. If you'd tuned into TV today, you might be forgiven for wondering if India, at least on principle, continues to be governed by a secular constitution. A government function, the opening of a short corridor that connects two sacred sites in the city of Varanasi in Uttar Pradesh, was turned into a mega religious event led by a constitutional authority, the Prime Minister, along with the entire cabinet of the BJP-run UP government, as they took a sacred dip, held prayers and much more. All of it filmed by multiple cameras supplied by the state-run Doordarshan. In fact, as the CEO of Prasar Bharati helpfully tweeted, DD supplied 55 cameras to broadcast this religious event. Now, while there's no formal definition of how the Indian state is supposed to practice secular principles as enshrined in the Constitution, there are broadly two popular models that have existed around the world. One is what is often called the European model, where the state maintains an arm's length from religion and religious practices, and the other, which has broadly been the Indian template, where the state engages equally with all religions, at least in principle. Now, the BJP, while in opposition, has often alleged that the secularism of the Congress and other non-BJP governments has been reduced to minority appeasement, citing as examples symbolic gestures like the hosting of iftar parties to state-funded economic benefits like subsidizing the Hajj pilgrimage. The Modi government came to power with the slogan of Sabka Saath, Sabka Vikas, implying equality for all and appeasement for none. But as today, and many such events have demonstrated, under the present BJP government, the state appears to have overwhelmingly aligned itself with Hindu religious interests, with barely a pretense towards acknowledging other faiths. In fact, in his speech today, the Prime Minister positioned today's inauguration as further evidence that, unlike previous governments, the BJP governments look out for the religious interests of Hindus, despite the wounds inflicted by past Muslim invaders. This was said in Banaras, a multi-faith city, with a number of prominent mosques, including one just a stone's throw away from today's events.
औरंगजेब के अत्याचार, उसके आतंक का इतिहास साक्षी है, जिसने संस्कृति को कट्टरता से कुचलने की कोशिश की। यहां अगर औरंगजेब आता है, तो शिवाजी भी उठ खड़े होते हैं.
Recall that the UP Deputy Chief Minister had gone even a step further, tweeting about a dozen days ago what appeared to be a warning to a mosque in the city of Mathura in western Uttar Pradesh. Now, the Mathura mosque has long been in the crosshairs of the Sangh Parivar as part of its unfinished agenda. And the tweet by Keshav Maurya reflected this, saying that the work on the temples of Ayodhya and Kashi are done. We're now readying for Mathura. Today's near total alignment of the Indian state with just one side, Hindus, marks the peak of a trend that has escalated since the Modi government has come to power. In the past 7 years, the Prime Minister has, accompanied by cameras, visited countless Hindu places of worship and inaugurated state-funded religious projects. Visits that it would be hard-pressed to justify, as some in the BJP right-wing ecosystem seek to do, as expressions of his personal faith, given that cameras, sometimes multiple cameras, were allowed to cover every inch of these visits, as well as promoting these visits via official channels. I'll just run you through some of these that you're seeing on the screen. The Prime Minister offering prayers at the Lingaraj temple in Bhubaneswar, his multiple visits to the Kedarnath shrine. The Prime Minister unveiling the Adi Shankaracharya statue at Kedarnath. The Prime Minister unveils a giant Bhagavad Gita at Delhi's ISKCON temple, performs aartis on the banks of the Ganga, offers prayers at the Badrinath temple, offers prayers at Kashi Vishwanath temple in Banaras in June of 2019, at the Guruvayur temple, performs the Bhumi Pujan of the Ram temple in Ayodhya, launches the Dev Deepavali Mahotsav in Banaras. The list is quite literally endless. Now, this could still be justified under the so-called Indian model of secularism of engaging equally with all faiths, if the Prime Minister had held similarly publicized government events linked to the Muslim or other minority faiths in India. But in contrast, we were hard-pressed to find any evidence that he had. This was some of the instances we came across. In June of 2018, visited the mausoleum of the Sufi saint Sant Kabir Das in Uttar Pradesh. In September of 2018, addressed the Bohra Muslim community gathering in a mosque in Indore, and some visits to Gurudwaras in Punjab and in Delhi. All right, let's go across now to panel. We have with us Hindol Sengupta, author, historian and columnist, someone considered to be inclined towards a right-wing view, if that was the right way of describing. Professor Aditya Mukherjee, historian and former professor of history at JNU. Nalini Singh, senior journalist. Faizan Mustafa, VC, Nalsar University of Law. There we have Hindol. Right. Let me start with you, Faizan Mustafa, that how do we now square off this idea of secularism as perhaps possibly envisaged in the Constitution, or at least it exists, at least on paper in the Constitution, with the increasing way the needle has moved of the state under this government aligning itself with the religious interests of one community, as today's event demonstrated? How do those two things
Thank you, Vasu. I understand that secularism is the core of modernity, but let us also admit that religions in India are totalizing, and Indians are essentially religious. And in any case, Banaras is very much part of our spiritual heritage. So probably we were not ready for secularism in 1950. We are not ready for secularism even today. But what to say of India, which is essentially, as I said, Indians are essentially religious. Even in United States of America, 85% of Americans, in spite of Jeffersonian wall of separation, believe that United States is a Christian country.
Right.
All US presidents, except Obama, have gone on record to say that they are a Christian country. There are judgments of US Supreme Court saying that we are a Christian nation with a Christian soul. So let us understand
that's not what any government, including this government, is saying. That's my point.
No, that's not the point. The point is they are trying to say that in personal life, one is free to follow religion. State shall maintain equidistance from all religions. What is really happening, Vasu, we cannot run away from this, that there is a nexus between religion, politics and business. And when we know that religions can win us votes,
right,
then people, in spite of whatever representation of People's Act may say, would continue to use religion. Arvind Kejriwal is doing it. Priyanka Gandhi is doing
everyone's doing it.
Rahul Gandhi was doing it. So I feel unless, and then the Supreme Court saying that Hindutva is a way of life. Therefore, now if you invoke the name of any other religion, it is a corrupt electoral practice. But
right,
if you invoke the name of Hindutva, it is not a corrupt electoral practice.
Okay, so the question though still remains. We know what's happening in practice. I'm asking a question as to how a government would seek to justify it. That's my question. And what are the dangers of this trend as it gets aggravated? And Hindol Sengupta, that's my question tonight, that if the idea of hosting iftar parties and all of that is minority appeasement, and the BJP came in with a promise of Sabka Saath, which means either you appease nobody or you embrace all religions equally, how is what we're seeing today as a prime example a more correct form of secularism? How is it not blatant majority appeasement?
It's not majority appeasement at all, Vasu, as the speaker before me was saying. And not just in America. America still has not just everything that Faizan Mustafa spoke about, but America still has, the US president holds a breakfast prayer meeting, which is overwhelmingly Christian in nature. And not just in America, Australia has the same tradition, UK has the same tradition. British prime ministers are on record saying that, England is essentially a Christian country. David Cameron used to say this very prominently in his Easter messages, but that doesn't stop.
I'm talking of India. No Indian Prime Minister has said India is a Hindu country.
Hold on.
Yeah.
At the end of the day, there are essential natures or essentially, cultural norms of different countries. In India, it's overwhelmingly Hindu. That doesn't stop it from being in any shape or form plural or welcoming to any other faith. All faiths are welcome. They thrive in India. But, that an Indian Prime Minister cannot, participate in such a function is an irrelevant point. I mean, most Indians don't believe it. Most Indians welcome what they saw on their television
Most
sets.
Indians, but hold on, Hindol, we're not on what people believe or not. There was a time when people felt that it was justified that widows should be burnt at the stake. That doesn't necessarily make it right.
I personally have no problems with iftar parties.
I'm on
held up as this great example of secularism. People who want to do iftar parties, they should be welcome to, and more the merrier. I have attended many iftar parties. I'm sure so have you. There's no problem. At the end of the day, there should be space.
So then I don't understand. If you mean to say that if the state is aligning itself openly with a particular religious community, that's fine. That is not against secularism.
The state is not aligning with one religious community, Vasu. There's a mistake in that fundamental sentence.
How is it not? This was a government event, funded and paid for by the government.
American presidents or British prime ministers say that their country is essentially a Christian country, but welcoming of every other community in the world.
Again, we are talking of India, and I can't, and let me try once more before I move on. We're talking of India, we're not talking of Britain, we're not talking of America, we're talking of India, a multi-faith country. This is a state-funded event. Let me finish the question. Hindol, if we talk over each other, no one can hear. This is a state-funded, sponsored event. Doordarshan covered it with 55 cameras. This has got nothing to do with the Prime Minister's personal faith. If he wants to go and pray in a church or wherever, or a mosque or a dargah or a temple, that's up to him. This is government funded, clearly aligning the state's interests with that of the majority religion.
So I've just been giving you examples that's why it's important to take examples from other parts of
I'm not asking for examples from other parts. I'm asking in the context of India, governed by a secular constitution, how do we justify something like what we saw today? Just simple.
But you have to take context from around the world. You cannot look at it in isolation. That's the entire point. You cannot look at it in isolation.
Interesting. Okay.
You have to look at it in context.
Okay. So we have to look at the context of India from other countries, not India itself. Aditya Mukherjee, is this a justifiable set of gestures and events that we saw today?
I don't think so. I would like to make two comments, one on Hindol and the other on Mustafa Saab. This thing about India not being prepared for secularism, I think is a fundamentally wrong idea. If India is not prepared for secularism, then which country is? And we've had probably the longest history of multiple religions living together and finding ways of living together. And more than that, we imagined our nationalism in exactly the opposite way in which nationalism was imagined in Europe, which was one religion, one language. From the beginning in the late 19th century, the Indian nation imagined itself. The whole idea of India is that we celebrate diversity. We are not a Hindu Rashtra or a Muslim Rashtra or this or the other. So it is absolutely not right. And what is happening today is the misuse of religion, using state power, choosing exactly those areas and temples where you can cause dispute, behaving exactly in the same manner as the communalists did under colonial rule. What the colonialists did, what the British did. You are now digging up, you're getting the ASI to do a physical survey to establish whether a part of this temple, Kashi Vishwanath temple, was the Gyanrapi mosque was built by demolishing part of the temple. And then you are saying that how the Prime Minister actually is the leader. Just remember, I want you to remember, Vasu, that from 2014, it has been said from the rooftops, including by the Prime Minister, of 1,000 years of foreign rule, which is now being overthrown. So this starlet, I forget her name, Kangana Rao, is repeating essentially what the BJP line is. Foreign rule has been removed and independence has really come by throwing out the Muslims or putting them in their place in 2014. I mean, this is not the India, at least I am part of or I am aware of.
Nalini Singh, it's actually funny in a way what Hindol is saying, when he said that this is a kind of irrelevant discussion at the moment. In a way, he's right, not in the way necessarily that he meant it, but the fact is that today the majoritarian needle has moved so far along that every political party now does this. Every party is either directly entering and posing in temples and mandirs and thing, or funding yatras, promising yatras as part of their election manifesto. How much is this a danger for India, which, as Aditya Mukherjee said, has in its own flawed way attempted to try to be a diverse state which respects faith, has never had a kind of state religion, but it now seems to be moving in that direction?
Vasu, I would say, how much is it a danger for Indian leaders, Indian politicians, not for ordinary Indians like us? It is amazing that I think that Indians, normal Indians, have had a tendency towards being secular, towards they want to get on with each other. But the leaders do not. They fear that Indians will get on with each other. And I would say that, it's really come to pass so quickly. I hadn't thought so, that it would. It has been said that politicians look to the past. The public looks to the future. And this is exactly what's happening now. And I would, just before I carry on, just want to say, I'm extremely glad that 5.5 lakh square feet of this, zone of the Mandir zone has become hygienic, has been cleaned up. But the rest of the city is pretty dirty. In places, it's pretty filthy. So when you're going back to the head of government, our Honorable Prime Minister, when he's on television for hours on end, performing many, many rituals. And here, I would also say that rituals are getting conflated with spirituality. Religiosity is getting conflated with spirituality. Hindu dharma is spiritual. So I would say that today, you've hit the nail on the head. Are we giving the impression of being a secular India as per our constitution, or of a Hindu Rashtra India? And this is going to be something.
One thing which Sandol has always intrigued me is that the BJP has always had a critique of secularism as practiced by other parties, that you do minority appeasement. That's pseudo-secularism, as Advani famously said. What is not clear when we look at what is happening today is what do you think the BJP's definition is, or what is a more apt form of secularism?
The BJP's definition, well, I am not, I don't know what the BJP's definition of secularism is.
But what do you think then is a more correct, if minority appeasement is bad secularism, then what is ideally then the functioning of a secular state?
I can only tell you this.
Yes.
As far as anybody who's read even a little bit of history knows, that the word secularism and socialism were considered by our founding fathers, so to speak, and our founding mothers. And they were not, in their wisdom, they decided not to include these terms. They were later brought in.
I know. That wasn't my question. I'm aware of the history.
That was brought in at a period when it was not entirely legal to bung them into the constitution. India has always been a plural society. We should celebrate that pluralism. But secularism, as understood in Europe, is alien to the fundamental way
You've not answered. Okay, you've managed to, I'm sorry to say, use up very little time that we have and not answered my question. We know we know that it was introduced later. We know the European model doesn't fit. I was asking, therefore, what do you think then works? Because for better or for worse, it is part of our constitution. and unless it's again amended and removed, which there are some indications it might, we're still stuck with it. But Faizan Mustafa, we're very short on time. I understand what you were saying, that look, let's be realistic, Indians are religious and all of that, but at the end of the day, if you are going to be a diverse, multi-faith society, then the state has to maintain some kind of veneer of neutrality or equidistant from religion, does it not?
Yeah, it is.
Then
But
how do,
you would
if
recall-
it does, then
No,
how
no,
do
you
you
were-
justify what happened today? That's what I come back to. I don't understand.
No.
What am I
Vasu,
missing?
you recall when Rajendra Prasad went to Somnath, Pandit Nehru went public against it. So you had this kind of fight within the Congress. I think the only person who was really committed to secularism was Nehru. Otherwise, Rajendra Prasad, Purushottam Das Tandon, and others, they were all for this kind of thing where Hinduism is celebrated. They were not going that far to say that in the constitution they would recognize Hinduism as a state religion. But I feel and I understand that we are criticizing the 42nd Amendment. Same amendment brought in fundamental duties. Same amendment brought in integrity. Same amendment said that the president can ask for the Council of Ministers. President would be bound by the advice of Council of Ministers. So selectively we are criticizing the 42nd Amendment, which is not fair. I am again saying that we Indians are living in this kind of duality. We say we are secular, but basically we are not secular. And if we are not secular, let us admit that Hinduism is the dominant cultural heritage of this India.
Interestingly, we seem to have, or at least because I was trying to ask Hindol what he thought the BJP's definition of secularism was, which, as he rightly said, he may not be the best person to answer because he's not representing the BJP. But Ram Madhav, who's a BJP RSS leader, actually wrote a piece on Bangladesh, on secularism in Bangladesh in the light of the attacks on Hindus there. And he actually had a very clear definition of what he thought secularism, at least how it should be practiced by Bangladesh. He said the representation of Hindus is steadily improved under Sheikh Hasina. There are 18 elected Hindu MPs today. The BJP, by contrast, the ruling party has 0, 17 of whom are from the ruling Awami League. Their representation in government services has also increased. Minorities constitute about 7% in civic employment and 10% in police jobs. So this is the great paradox, is it not, Aditya Mukherjee, that you expect your neighbors to be secular in exactly the way that you've had a problem with here. Here there are Muslims are getting harassed in Gurgaon, Christians are getting attacked across the country, worst in Karnataka, BJP ruled. But in other parts and of the country, neighbors, you want them to be secular, protect minorities.
Absolutely. I mean, this is double speak, of the worst variety. But the point is, again, I have great respect for Faizan Saab. I think he's one of the leading thinkers on issues like this. But I beg to differ again that when you say that secularism is not acceptable thing in India, or only Nehru was secular. What about Gandhiji? Our people, as Dalini correctly said, I mean, you go outside the political class which is creating trouble. Right. The people are basically secular. It's the common sense of the Indian people is secular. What is being done is to poison it with communalism.
All right. Okay, well, we're out of time. Ram Madhav actually further goes on to write that he criticizes the fact that in Pakistan, they amended the constitution to remove the word secularism, while here it seems to be heading in the opposite direction. Anyway, let's see how it plays out. We're out of time. Thank you all so much for joining us on Reality Check. It's been fascinating. We'll have to leave it there. Good night.